When it comes to the movie The Roses, I'm going to be completely honest and say I found it to be quite an intriguing and fun film for quite a lot of reasons. But firstly, when I went into this film, I will be honest and say I had a lot of fear due to the type of people going in to watch it and the trailers that were being shown. I thought I may have misinterpreted the trailer and that this film that seemed like a rom-com would be more on the dramatic side of things. Luckily, all my negative thoughts and fears were squashed once the film started, and I will say I was heavily surprised to see in the opening of this film the word cunt being used, especially by a woman of all people, and from then on I was locked into this film. Honestly, the film was funny for so many reasons, but the vulgarity was the biggest part of it. Now, vulgarity and swearing humour I always enjoy. I will say at times it can get boring, and I think any actor could really pull it off, but what was great about this film is the fact it's two middle-class British actors using this type of language, and not only is it quite a shock for the audience, but also in the film they will use it so well, especially when American characters are involved, as we see them being taken back by English people, especially women, using such vulgarity. Now, apart from the comedy, this film was really intriguing on the social elements that they would talk about. For example, parenting was a huge topic in this film. We see that the couple, Theo and Ivy, have different ways of teaching. With Theo, he's a bit more on the healthy side of things, he's a bit more strict towards the children, but the problem is he is the breadwinner and he is not the one really in the house the majority of the time, so his teachings are landing on deaf ears. And the mother is a bit more of a free-spirited person and is filling the kids up, using them as her guinea pigs for her cooking, especially on the sweet variety, which the father does question. It's up until a disaster and a good thing for both of these characters that they decide to swap roles. Now Ivy is the breadwinner and Theo is now raising the kids, and he decides to morph them into health fitness proteges, which not only does upset Ivy, as this is something very new to her and it feels like a complete betrayal of what her teachings were to the children, but as the years go by, she barely recognises the children she once raised. It's very sad but also intriguing to see the sacrifice breadwinner parents are having to make when trying to keep the family afloat cash-wise. They lose out on their children, seeing them grow. Not only that, but they become imposters to what they originally saw them as, and it's really quite sad to see. In this film they also deal with ego death with the character of Theo, who loses his business and his self-worth, and he tries his best to hide it, but we as the audience know that he is suffering deeply, more than he'd care to admit. Not only through that, but he is now suffering and feeling damaged because his wife is becoming the talk of the town more so than he was. And in this film it's intriguing to see that both of these people get their dreams, but it's at the cost of both pride and actual money. From the pride point of view, it's through Theo. He sees his wife get this amazing opportunity and is doing it amazingly well, to the fact that she's got her own franchise, but he is no longer the talk of the town. Like I said, he has become yesterday's jam and people are celebrating her way more than he was, and he feels a shell of himself. But in order to fix that, Ivy gives him that opportunity to build them a house for them to live in, their own home. But this is at the cost of the money that she's been making and having to cut down on being at the restaurants that she loves dearly. And the issue is she feels he's spending way too much of her money on items that she feels that are pretentious and just outright unnecessary. What I really enjoy is this film is able to tackle such serious topics, yet whilst being dramatic, the comedy does not suffer. If anything, it's just up there with these dramatic topics, and I really enjoy that, as most comedy films are either one or the other, sacrificing comedy for them to dive into those topics, or the comedy is so overwhelming that the conversation and seriousness has been thrown under the rug. The thing that I enjoyed, but I don't think really gets mentioned in the actual film, is how deceptive and toxic their American friends are, as they are constantly critiquing and chatty towards the other's partner. When they're with Theo, they're absolutely so negative to Ivy, claiming that she's emasculated him. And then with Theo, one of the American wives are openly flirtatious with him in front of Ivy, even making awkward and disturbed advances towards him in front of her own husband, passing it off as humour when in reality she wants him. You see, none of the characters really discussed that, which I found kind of odd. When it comes to the third act, it got a bit weird and odd, I would describe it, as throughout this film, whilst you see these characters having their issues, you can somewhat be on both sides. At least I was. I found them both hilarious and I'd had sympathy for both characters. But there's a point in the third act of the film where we kind of turn on the character Theo, as Ivy really wants to have this conversation with him, and Theo just says something so horrendously cruel to her, even though she's just trying to learn about something that everyone else is talking about, and she just wants to know why she didn't hear it firsthand from him rather than having to hear it secondhand from friends. And she really wanted to engage and learn about what was going on, and he cuts her down. And it's the first time I've seen, anyway, you start to dislike the protagonist in the third act of the film, as usually you do that either in the first or second act, and the third act is for the redemption, but with this they make a twist on it, which I will say is new. I enjoy that. Now, when it comes to the third act of the film, I will say, as much as it angers me that it got spoiled through trailers, I really enjoyed it for what it was, and that is seeing these two dealing with the divorce, kind of how the twits in the Roald Dahl book deal with their marriage, all in a way just to get one over in the divorce, so one comes out more superior than the other. And I thought it was amazingly well done. And then when it comes to the ending, I will say it's quite dark and somewhat sad, but there's a niceness to it as well, especially when we're seeing these characters fighting with one another. It's very tense but funny at the same time. Now, when it comes to critiques of the film, I don't have many. I will say I felt the actor Ncuti Gatwa, along with other British characters in this film, heavily underused, especially when in comparison to the American actors and characters, who I thought got way more screen time in comparison. But my second critique is more about the way it was advertised, if anything else, as it angered me that the third act of the film was heavily promoted in the way of trailers and etc. And so when you watch the first two acts, barely any of it is in those trailers, and so when you watch that you really enjoy it, but then you realise that the majority of the scenes that were promoted is at the end, and so you kind of know what's going on. I found it a bit disappointing. Overall, I really did enjoy this film. I went into it with fears that it's just this kind of typical love story, sob story type thing, but left with laughter. Not only was this film funny, but it's dove into very serious topics, seeing characters having to deal with the fact their partner is more successful than they were, dealing with ego and ego death. Found all of it delightful. Is this film good? I'm going to be honest and say it was great. Rating wise is an 8.5 out of 10. Now, when it comes to would I rewatch it, the answer's plain and simple, and that is a yes. I really enjoyed this film. It was very funny, and I bet there's many jokes that I may have missed on the first time watch that I could easily spot on the second time. Now, when it comes to recommendations, firstly, I would recommend the Roald Dahl book, The Twits, which I mentioned earlier, as it really appeared in my head when watching this film, especially on the third act, and this is a book I haven't read in some time, so I thought it was worth mentioning the fact this film reminded me of that. The film itself is a remake of the book/film War of the Roses, and I haven't seen the original or read the book, but it'd be interesting to dive into that, to compare one another. The film's in a sense similar to this, but more in the dark or suspenseful area. Look no further than Gone Girl. Whilst the couple are more unlikable than in this, and they're more horrific, and it's not as funny, the film does have its appeal, and you can make similarities between the two, of a couple slowly hating one another. When it comes to Olivia Colman, I think she's great, especially when she is working with David Mitchell and Robert Webb, whether it's in the TV show Peep Show, where she plays Sophie, the love interest of Mark, played by David Mitchell, or appearing in many sketches in the first few seasons of the TV show That Mitchell and Webb Look. She's fantastic in either. And then Benedict Cumberbatch, admittedly he's not known for his comedic performances. One of my favourite ones of his, where he's actually being comedic, is in the film Four Lions. He is a terrible negotiator. Admittedly, a small scene in the third act, very funny and worth a look at. Those are my recommendations. This has been my review for The Roses. Thank you for watching. If you have enjoyed, please like and subscribe, but most importantly, have a nice day.